Shay-type locomotive. Now, Shay stands for the name of the inventor of that class, Mr. Ephraim Shay. And Shay locomotives are a type of geared logging locomotive. Now, it's very different from your conventional steam engine. A conventional steam engine would have two pistons on either side with a rod directly driving the wheels, but that locomotive actually has a gear reduction system between the cylinders and the wheels that gives it an extreme amount of torque. That locomotive was built by the Lima Locomotive Works of Lima, Ohio in the year 1912. She's 106 years old, still fighting up and down this mountain. And get your cameras ready on the right-hand side because you're going to be able to see the working side of that Shay locomotive. So the way that engine works up there is that there's actually a 2,700 degree oil fire in the firebox of that locomotive. We burn recycled motor oil here, and that fire is boiling the water, creating 200 pounds per square inch of steam pressure. Now that steam pressure is being funneled through the throttle as the engineer opens the throttle up and down to the cylinders. And the cylinders are those three things on the right-hand side going up and down. Those drive the crankshaft, which runs the entire length of the right-hand side of the locomotive. And on that crankshaft are little pinion gears, basically cone-shaped gears that mesh with the ring gears bolted to every wheel on that locomotive. Every wheel on the right-hand side, at least, because everything's on the right-hand side on Shay. But because of the fact that every wheel and axle is connected on that engine, that means that that engine is an all-wheel drive locomotive. Now you may also notice that crankshaft has flexible universal joints on it, and that is because that engine needs to be able to pivot going around very sharp turns, and those flexible joints allow the wheel trucks to pivot as the engine rounds sharp turns and goes over rough track. Shays are built for torque and built for flexibility on tight turns. But one thing that Shays were not built for is speed. The top speed of that locomotive is just about 10 to 15 miles an hour, and we probably won't even hit the high mark of that today. But these engines were primarily built for logging service. But that doesn't mean the railroad we are on today was ever used for logging, because this is actually a recreation of a logging railroad we're riding on. This forest was never logged, and this is actually a recreation of a narrow gauge logging railroad. Now, narrow gauge refers to anything narrower than the American standard gauge of 4 feet 8 1/2 inches. That line to Santa Cruz you saw the other train coming in on, that is a standard gauge line. But this is narrow gauge, and it's actually 3-foot narrow gauge. There are 3 feet between the rails on this railroad, and this was very common in North American logging railroads and short lines. So as we go up and down this hill today, Dixiana is going to be doing exactly what she was built to do, hauling on this very steep mountain. Now we are officially out of the meadow and into the redwood forest. Now you folks are very, very lucky today in that you're riding through one of the very few old-growth redwood forests in existence. Only about 4% of the old-growth redwood trees remain today. The other 96% was logged off right around the turn of the 20th century. But thankfully this forest was preserved, and most of the trees you're going to be seeing today are the Sequoia sempervirens trees. Now, sempervirens is Latin for ever living, but these trees are more commonly known as the California coast redwoods. Now, this is because all logging railroads had two things in common, regardless of where they were. They were curvy and they were steep. And This is a very good example of how curvy things can get on a logging railroad. Curves don't get much tighter than this. But after we get off this bridge, we're going to be going up the side of this little canyon here on a grade that tops out at just over 8.5%. What do I mean by 8.5%? Well, I mean that for every 100 feet our train goes forward, we are going to be rising vertically 8.5 feet. To give you some perspective on this, most railroads of today are modern Amtrak train or average freight train. They don't go on grades much above 2 or 3%. And anything over that, they just purely will not do it. Here at Roaring Camp, though, we consider that pretty level. These engines were built to go up very steep grades, and Dixiana herself weighs 42 tons. And with all of you on board this train, that's another 60 tons behind her. So all in all, that engine is going to be hauling 102 tons up this impossible mountain grade. Pretty remarkable for a machine that's over 106 years old. Now Dixiana is going to be starting to make a lot of noise as she goes up the hill here. And as she does that, I'm going to come around and start collecting those tickets from you. So have those ready for me. Tickets, please. Tickets.
Famous corkscrew, 6% grade pretzel.
So to explain a little bit about how this switchback works, essentially think of it as a big Z, a track arrangement in a Z with tails at the end of the junctions where the two lines of the Z's come together. So we just camp on the bottom of the Z in the forward direction. Now we're backing up the middle of the Z. We stopped on tail track and then we cleared that little junction where the two lines come together and I line the switch behind the train. Now we're backing up the diagonal line of the Z, the middle part of the Z, and then we're going to get to the top, onto another tail track, clear that junction, and then line the switch in front of the locomotive, and then continue on the top of the Z the rest of the way to Bear Mountain in the forward direction. Now, this switchback that we're backing up is actually the steepest narrow gauge railroad grade in all of the United States. It tops out at just over 10%. Dixiana is going to be working very hard getting this train up the grade, so have your cameras pointed down towards that locomotive. Impressive that structure was back when it was in service.
departing Grand Canyon Road.